Okay, sorry. My video stopped working after I got done with journal guideline number 3. So I continued writing journal guideline number 4 and 5. So I'm just going to show them here so that you can copy them down. Journal guideline number 4 is make sure that every page is filled out. Meaning, when you are absent, check with Mrs. Hurst to see what notes were missed on that day. Okay, it is so important that you keep every page filled out and that you catch up on the notes when you are gone, because this is what we are able to use in all assignments, on tests, and I'd hate for you to miss out on some of the notes just because you were gone. Okay? All right, then journal guideline number 5. Because these are your personal grammar Bibles, you are free to add a touch of color or graphics if you're a visual learner, or if that's just how you are wanting to decorate your journal or any pages in here. You are free to do that. Just make sure that your drawings or your coloring is not taking away from the main message of that page, but it's enhancing it, it's helping it, it's aiding in it, and it's not the main focus of that page, okay? Because it is the main focus of that page, or every page in here is the notes. So let's make sure those are the main focus, okay? But I don't care if you are using bubble letters up here, or you're coloring in, or you maybe draw some little doodles over here that help you remember what's on that page and what's being talked about on the page. That's totally fine with me, okay? Now, we are then going to flip open to the next page. And the next page is going to have our plot mountain on it. So our title is going to be Plot Mountain. Because I wrote a title on this page, it's on page 10. I'm going to flip over to my table of contents and fill out page 10. Plot Mountain. Okay, then I'm going to flip back to the page, and this is where the next 3 pages of that packet that you were given are going to be used. Now, you are going to take, depending on how you want to do it, you can cut them out from each page, or if you want to rip the next 3 pages out, we're going to be using this page, and this page. Okay, so I'm going to rip those 3 out, and we are going to spend some time cutting these out. So I'm going to cut each box out individually here, and then I am going to cut all the way around each little box, and I'm going to include this white space up on top. Okay, so I'm going to cut around that. We do need that white space eventually when we glue them into our composition notebook. So I'm going to continue with these. These I'm going to separate. I just cut it out around the outside of both of them just to make it easier on myself. We do need them all separate. So that page is done. Then I'm going to move on to my next page. So this again, I'm going to cut around both of these right now just to make it a little easier on myself, and then I'll cut them apart once they're all done. And then 2 more on this page. All right, so those first 2 pages are done. We should have all of these individual boxes. There should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 by the time we are done. Okay, then I'm going to set those aside, and I'm going to cut out each of these dotted line boxes separate from each other. kind of the same thing that I did last time. Cut around these guys, and then I'll separate them eventually. Okay, and the top three. Okay. Now, those are all done. You should have 7 of the dotted line boxes all cut out separate from each other. So we are actually going to, now that I'm looking at it, we're going to label the next page the same title, Flat Mountain, so that we can spread these out between 2 pages. Okay? So then that means go back to your table of contents and label the next page Flat Mountain. I could have drawn an arrow again. I just chose, because it's one more title is all, to rewrite the whole title. Okay, so now here's where the fun part comes. You are going to take these squares that you cut out. Does not matter what order you put them in. Okay, you are going to glue them onto the page. I'm just going to set them on first. I'm not going to glue them yet, just to see how I'm going to set this up eventually. So it looks like I can fit 4 on this page, and then I'll put 3 on the next page. Okay, so it'll look like this when it's done. Okay, so I'm going to take my glue, and I'm only going to glue the back side of this white space. So I'm going to glue right back here. Okay, so I'm going to flip it over. I'm just going to glue the back of this, and then glue it down. And I'm going to kind of fold it a little bit, just because we're going to make it into a flap and do something with the underneath part of it. So you're going to continue to glue the back side of that top empty space for the rest of these boxes. Okay, and then fold it up. So that page is done. Then I'm going to flip over to the next page and do those. Okay, now that all of those are done, you should have 7 individual flaps. 4 on the first page, doesn't matter what 4 you pick, and then 3 on the second page. So now we are going to take the dotted ones that we cut out, and we're going to match them up and glue them all the way on the back. So glue the whole back side down underneath the correct part of a story. So let's look at my first one. I'm going to look at box number 1 here. So box number 1 says the background information given at the beginning of a story about the main characters and the set. Okay? We are going to glue that underneath your tab that says exposition on it. Exposition is the beginning of the story, and that is just giving the reader background information that may be helpful in understanding what's going on in the story. You probably have heard that as the setting. A lot of times it'll give you the time frame that this story is going on. It'll give you the place that this story is taking place, maybe some character names. So the background information is called the exposition. Okay, this one is the first one. The second one, I'm going to go to box number 2. Box number 2 says the main problem and difficult circumstances that arise as the main character tries to solve the problem. This is called the conflict. So you're going to find your conflict box. You're going to glue number 2 underneath conflict. Make sure to glue them pretty well so they don't fall out eventually. Okay. Number 2 is conflict. Okay, let's look at box number 3. Box number 3 is the most exciting, intense, or important event in a story. This is called the climax. Okay, so you're going to find your climax. Climax and number 3 are matches. So I'm going to glue number 3 underneath climax. And it is done. Now I'm going to take box number 4. Box number 4 says the point in a story where the conflict or complications are solved. This is the resolution. This is where usually it's found at the end of the story. This is where the problem's solved, the characters have figured the problem out, they have kind of made up if there was some bad tension between them. So number 4 is the resolution. And we're going to go to number 5. Number 5, the main events of a story written in sequence and including a beginning, middle, and end. This is called the plot. The plot is the entire story, basically. So it's a lot of the main parts of the story all kind of jumbled into one without all the extra details. So the main events of a story written in sequence, including a beginning, middle, and end. So number 5 is the plot. Okay, let's move on to number 6. Number 6 says the series of events that occur after the climax and when the conflict has been resolved. Number 6 is called the falling action. So this is kind of how the story unfolds after the most intense part of the story and what's leading up to how the story ends. So it's kind of halfway in between the middle and the end of the story. Okay, last but not least, number 7, you can probably guess which one this is. The series of related events that begin after the exposition. Remember, this is the setting, all that background information at the beginning of the story, and lead up to the climax. So this is in between the beginning of the story and most likely the middle of the story. This is called the rising action. It's your last one that's left. Okay, so number 7 is the rising action. All right, so I will go through them all one more time, just so you can see it. If you missed them before, feel free to pause this if you need to catch up or take some notes. All right, so I'm going to do them, let's do here. Plot. Plot matches up with number 5. Okay. Conflict matches up with number 2. Climax matches up with number 3. Resolution matches up with number 4. Falling action matches up with number 6. Rising action matches up with number 7. And exposition matches up with number 1. All right, now I would like you to take some different colored marker or crayon or colored pencil or a different colored pen. I'm going to use an orange one here just so you can see it a little bit better. We're going to think of the whole story as this mountain that's on each page. Okay? Notice it's on each foldable. The mountain is the same on each foldable. We're going to mark on this mountain where this specific term in the story takes place. So the plot, we said, was the main events of a story written in sequence and including a beginning, middle, and end.
This fish, to be honest, Miss Fish. This announcements for teachers that the access road in the back of the building by one park will be.
Okay, sorry for the interruption. Okay, so because plot is the main events of a story, written in sequence, including a beginning, middle, and end, it's kind of talking about the story as a whole. So with your different color pen, pencil, marker, crayon, whatever you're using, I want you to put a little bracket underneath this tab. This is showing that it's including the whole story. The whole story is included in this term, and that's kind of what that term means. Okay, so it's the different parts of the story, beginning, middle, and end, of how they unfold in order. All right, now we're going to start at the beginning of the story. Okay, so this is the story as a whole. So let's start out at the beginning. Remember, we said exposition was that background information. So I'm going to put a little X right here on this mountain. We're starting to climb up the mountain. We're starting the story. We're starting to learn about the mountain. Starting to learn about the story. Okay? Now, as we go up the mountain, our next part of the story is going to be the rising action. So the rising action is in between the exposition, which was down here, and our next point of the mountain. So I'm going to put an X in the middle of the left side of the mountain to show that as we're climbing the mountain, the story is starting to build. The next point in our story, which is actually the top of the mountain, is our climax. This is the most intense part of the story, where probably the most drama happens, where your heart beats a little faster when you're reading the story. And what's interesting about the climax is this can happen not necessarily always in the middle of the story. This can happen toward the beginning. It can happen right in the middle of the story. It can happen toward the end of the story. And there can actually be multiple climaxes, multiple really intense parts of the story. Okay, we're just going to put it in the middle because this is kind of what the resolution centers around and what becomes of the story as a whole. Okay, so the climax is the peak of the mountain, the most intense part of the story. Now, as we go down the mountain, we then get to our falling action. So we're going to put an X right in the middle of the right side of the mountain. So now we're starting to make our way down the mountain to show that this is how the climax affects the resolution of the story and how the conflict has been resolved. So our resolution is our next point. This is going to have an X at the very bottom right-hand side of the mountain. This is how the story finishes. It's how the problem is solved, the characters make up, or they compromise in some way. And we have one more left. We have our conflict left. The conflict is the main part of the story. Without a conflict in the story, you don't really have a story. So I'm going to put a big X in the middle of the mountain just like this to show that this happens anywhere in the story. It could happen multiple times in the story. It can also happen as a huge part of the story too. Okay, so the conflict is the main part of the story. That's why we have such a big X on there.